The following presentation was recorded live in Las Vegas, Nevada for the 27th Annual International Association of Square Dance Callers. This is tape 19, Teaching.
Good afternoon. My name is Mike Jacobs. I'm from Herndon, Virginia. John Marshall on my left is from Centerville, Virginia, and we're going to be conducting a panel seminar on teaching today. Probably this is one of the most important aspects of our square dance calling activity, because it is through teaching that most of our dancers reach the square dance world. And yet, because of the performance aspect of square dancing, that skill of performing is what's really accentuated in most of our learning situations, and the skill of teaching, as well as voice,
we are taping all the critical aspects.
Yes, yes. And then there's the effect of tuberculosis in this market. Yeah. So we find that teaching is a very important activity, but at the same time it's one of the activities that we know the least about. What we're going to do today is I will be taking an overview of how people learn and the situations of learning and teaching. John's going to apply these specifics to our square dance world. First thing I want to look at, and what we're going to have here is we were not able to get the handouts available for this. So what we're going to do at the conclusion is take your name if you're interested in the handout. The home office will be sending these handouts to you. The first basic principle of teaching is to realize that there are different types of intelligences out there. One study has identified 8 types of intelligences. There's the verbal linguistic, which is the type of person who has highly developed verbal skills and often think in words. They like reading, playing word games, making up poetry and stories, getting involved in discussions, debating, formal speaking. The accent is on the verbal aspect. There's the logical mathematical. The best example of this person is the Albert Einstein. These people think conceptually and abstractly and are able to see patterns in relationships that others often miss. They like to experiment, solve puzzles, other problems. There's the visual spatial. These people think in images and pictures. They're very often aware of objects, shapes, and colors and patterns in their environment. Pablo Picasso is probably a great example of this type of intelligence. There's the bodily kinesthetic. These people have keen body awareness. They like physical movement, hugging, dancing, making and inventing things with their hands, and role-playing. They communicate well through body language and other physical gestures. An example of this type of person would be the skater, the ice skater, Chrissy Yamaguchi. There's the musical rhythmic. These people love music and rhythmic patterns. They're very sensitive to sounds in the environment, the chirp of a cricket, rain on the roof, varying traffic patterns. They often reproduce a melody or rhythmic pattern after hearing it only once. Paul McCartney is probably a great example of this type of person. Interpersonal intelligence. These people learn through person-to-person interaction. They generally have lots of friends, show a great deal of empathy for other people, and understanding different points of view. Eleanor Roosevelt is an example of someone strong in this type of intelligence. Interpersonal. These people like to work alone and sometimes shy away from others. They are self-reflective and self-aware, and thus tend to be in tune with their inner feelings, values, beliefs, and thinking processes. Emily Dickinson is probably a great example of this type of person. There's the naturalist. This person readily notices characteristics and patterns. They innately sense appropriate categories based on the characteristics they observe and are able to group items accordingly. Charles Darwin is an example of this type of intelligence. So you have 8 types of intelligences. That is how we think about things and solve problems. The next stage to understanding the people that are out in front of you is to realize that they have different learning styles. This has nothing to do with their type of intelligence. This is how they extract the information from the environment, how they get it to themselves. There are 3 basic learning styles. There is the visual, there is the auditory, and then there is the tactile kinesthetic. Now, this means this is the primary way by which you access information. This is how you learn, as opposed to your intelligence. Each of the 8 intelligences that I identified there may have a completely different learning style. Some readily help themselves and others don't. You don't necessarily control how your learning style developed. It's part of the environment and part of what you were born with. So the learning style that may help you in your intelligence and may actually work to be counterproductive. That's why we have people learning in different ways. A visual learner doesn't necessarily have to read everything, but he imprints that learning process onto his brain primarily through visual things, visual clues, visual cues. An auditory learner primarily brings in information into his learning style through hearing it. I'm a tactile learner. It's also interesting that, before I go into the explanation, that you tend to teach well those of your own learning style and tend to find it a very difficult process understanding how someone else is learning out of a different learning style. I'm a tactile learner. Well, on a phone conversation, I need to make notes that write down. Sometimes I can't even read them. It's just simply the action is associated with that phone conversation, and I can remember all the information. If I don't take the notes, it goes literally in one ear and out the other. I don't process the information at all. So tactile learners are by feel and the environment in which they learn in. Tell me that I need to turn 180 degrees probably doesn't work well for me. Telling me I need to face the wall behind me does, because I have a physical object to relate to. Tactile learners are strange birds, and we're still identifying much of the process of that learning process, but it's a very different feeling. Tactile learners, for instance, have you ever had one of your children that absolutely had to have the radio and TV on while they were doing their homework? That's because that person is a tactile learner. They need an environment in which to learn. And putting them in a totally silent area really shuts off the learning process for them as opposed to helping them to learn. So when you're processing learning styles, it's needful to observe the people in front of you to see what they do and how they process the information. We listen to how they talk and communicate, because it gives you clues on how they do learn. We experiment with what works. If one way doesn't work, you don't yell it louder. It's the same approach we take to somebody that doesn't speak English. You try the first time with English with them, it doesn't work, so you yell English again louder. That doesn't achieve any more communication. It's a bankrupt approach. So you experiment with some other approach to try to get through until you do achieve a learning situation. You focus on strengths, not on weaknesses. And you learn more about learning styles in general by paying close attention to the people in front of you and the learning style in particular. You can recognize and identify the patterns of behavior and communication that will become the keys for understanding and appreciating the style difference. The next step after that is there are different stimuli to the learning process. What's interesting is that even though we have auditory, visual, and tactile learners and so forth, the primary stimulus to learning is done through the sense of sight. And that's one of the more interesting things here. There is a breakdown of this, and the percentage-wise is 75% of our learning process comes through the sense of sight. Only 13% comes through the sense of hearing, 6% through the sense of touch, 3% through the sense of taste, and only 3% through the sense of smell. You know, John was pointing out earlier that one of the most emphatic things that hits us about processes is the sense of smell, and yet we don't really learn from the sense of smell. We really learn from the sense of sight. The other part of this study that was done is that when we use words alone, the unit of retention is the least significant. With pictures alone, the unit of retention is just 2 times more significant. The combination of words and pictures together creates the best learning, the best approach stimulation to learning. That it is 6.5 times more significant if pictures and words are used together. Which means that just standing up on a microphone and teaching dancers is really probably not the best way to get through. That showing examples of what a setup should look like, getting out on the floor and actually demonstrating and creating pictures in front of them as well as the lecture from the microphone is probably the best stimuli towards the learning process, regardless of the learning style. Finally, there needs to be a logic in the approach to teaching. There isn't just one logic that is effective. There are 8 different, let me make sure the number, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. No, that's 7. There are 7 different logic approaches to teaching. You can do it with the approach of doing the whole to part. That is, giving the big picture first and then the specific parts as you go through. The second approach is importance. Is start with the most important item first and then work to the least important. Another legitimate approach is the chronological order. What you need to learn first as opposed to what you need to learn second. Geographical, taking things in the order of their physical relationship, whether they're store locations or equipment in the restaurant or whatever, it's the geographical location of where you are. Magnitude, large to small, or vice versa. Difficulty, from the easiest to the known to be more difficult or unknown. Performance, you present a procedure in the order in which it's performed. We use all of these different logics in the course of teaching. None of them are better than anyone else, any one of the other ones. It is a matter of recognizing that some apply to one particular call as to another one. And if you find a bankrupt approach in a logic of how you taught it, maybe a different logic is what is called for there. So the logic of how we present is just as important as the learning stimuli that we use, the learning styles that the dancers have in front of you, and their intelligence, not how intelligent they are, but what type of intelligence they are, in order to be able to teach the people in front of you. Now, it sounds like an awful lot of material to go to sit up and teach right and left through. But when you look at the people in front of you and recognize they're having difficulty, then we have to go through some kind of process to be able to identify what is causing the difficulty. The learning style of an individual is just as valid whether it is tactile, or visual, or auditory. It is different, not dumb. One of the biggest problems we make behind the microphone in teaching dancers is that we make the judgment that because they didn't effectively perform after the first teach, that they're bad dancers, that they're dumb dancers, that they are people that cannot handle the activity. And in reality, it is the teach that is bankrupt. It is the teach that didn't get through. And instead of yelling it louder, we need to take a different vantage point towards teaching. The only way we can find out how to get through is to find out who these people are. We observe, we talk, we need to listen to them too. They may complain in a way that you don't understand because you're of a different learning style. Does that invalidate their complaint? No. But it does present you with a job to try to understand what they are complaining about. What is the course of that complaint? And so you have many times had dancers come up and make a complaint about a call, and it has no bearing on anything, in your judgment. Because we, as teachers, tend to be of one learning style. The people in front of us can be, 2/3 of them of a completely different learning style. So we need to find out how they are coming at us. What are they really expressing here? They'll get calls confused for no reason on earth that we can understand. And yet, the two actions are confused in their mind. So the thing is that we need to listen to them and find out why the confusion is occurring. What is causing the problem for them? What did not get through in the process? John and I did a panel earlier today where we were talking about advanced and challenge choreography, and John had a dancer that couldn't understand a certain aspect. The man was an air traffic controller, so he talked about his job with him. And then when he finally got around to it, he used the explanations the man gave to him in his job to explain the call he was having the problem with. And from that point on, the man had no more problem with the call. But if John hadn't taken the time to learn the background of the individual, listen to him, and try to work from his vantage point, he would have never succeeded in the teach. And that's how we need to handle the teaching problems that are presented to us. John's going to take a more specific look at a number of different calls and their teaching problems. We're going to look at his explanations and problem solving in light of the ideas of different learning styles. So without any hesitation, Mr. John Marshall.
Thank you, Mike. Okay. A couple things. I think you did have 8, Mike. There was one that wasn't listed that we don't always talk about. It has to do with importance and how we learn things. And it's personal importance to how we learn things. Question. Everybody in the room, where is the nearest bathroom in this hall, to this hall? Is there anybody that can't tell me how to find the nearest bathroom? I'll bet virtually everybody here can. It's one of the things that we learn when we go out to these kinds of events. Let's spot that on the way in, because we're going to need to know. It's important. They didn't list it, but we all find things that are personally important to us. Are calls personally important? A specific call personally important to our dancers when they come into the hall? No, I don't think so. They don't think of that. Having a good time is important. Doing well in the square, maybe more to the vein of not messing up, in the square becomes important to our dancers, and we want to make them successful. We also tend to focus quite a bit in our overall learning, and some of this is going to be general, and then we're going to go to specific calls, and we're going to have a square get up and help us out. But generally, we kind of need to step back from just calls and look at the big picture. Well, you need to look at your group and your room and your people as a whole, and look at ways we can impact them as a whole in their learning process. You are all involved in a learning process with Mike and I right now. Hopefully. You are also all full of lunch and nodding off and what have you. I would have different reactions. Mike had stuff that he had to lay as a foundation. It was numbers. It was theory. It was hard. It was real. It was important. It was effective. It was real stuff. But I'd like to bring some of you, back with us a little bit more, maybe a little more focus. What's one of our biggest tools? When I look out at my whole group, I want them back with me. I don't want to focus just on my call. I want to use music as one of my tools, right? Pick anything. It doesn't matter. But I want all of you to quit sleeping on what Mike and I are doing here. What are the words to this, Mike? The point is this: we look at our crowd, we look at our group, we look at the big picture. Don't just get all caught up, focused in on the call that I have to teach tonight, or these 3 calls that I have to teach tonight. Get connected. It's part of the learning process between you, the dynamic between you and your dancer. I don't care if it's one square. You need to get connected. And when you do that, you're looking at more than just a given call, because that connection is going to help you see what's going on. Mike gave an example of one call with one dancer who was having a problem. Well, we all know that if you're lucky enough, if you're one of those very fortunate people to have 4 or 5 squares in a class, you can't do that with every single dancer. You'd never get anything taught. But there are the exceptions, and you make your way around for that. And we all have that. When that odd dancer who there's this one guy there who can't get this call or that call, so we go after that person, and we find and we talk to him and we look for a way. There's lots of ways you can do it. I watched a caller one night try his darndest to teach boxinette, and there were a group of people that were doing just fine, but there was somebody else who just couldn't quite get a handle on it. It just didn't make sense. They were always a little cattywampus when it was done, and they were kind of fumbling around, and I kind of looked at this couple, and let's just say that they weren't probably charter members of AARP, but close. And so I went to them and I said, "Do you remember the old jitterbug steps?" And they said, "Yeah, why?" And I said, when you used to turn the girl under on a jitterbug step?" And they said, "Yeah." I said, "That's boxinette." "Really?" I said, "Yeah. That's all. They were done." What can they relate to? Try to find something they can relate to. Do we have to clean up the edge a little bit? Sure, And I had to ask them to quit doing the low hip thing, but that was, well, they got kind of caught up in the music. But the idea is we find ways to relate to people. It's part of teaching. We all have frames of reference. So my frame of reference may not be jitterbug. But if I can be aware of different frames of reference, it might work. So we look for that. One of the ones that we'll come up with in a frame of reference to a dancer was square through. I had a gentleman in square, and I'm not picking on our seniors, but this gentleman was probably about 81. He could not get square through. Just couldn't get it. It was just not working for him. Took him aside. I asked him, "Do you know how to drive?" So, of course. I said, "Are you still driving?" And I did it in a nice way. He wasn't indignant about his response. He says, yeah, he was kind of proud of the fact that he was still driving. I said, fine. Can we talk about something for a minute? Let me show you. It's between tips, just the two of us off in the corner, and I stood behind him. I said, I want you to drive me around the block. You're the driver, I'm the passenger. We're ahead of a one-way street. The streets are all one way to the right. Each street is a dead end. Drive me to the end of the block. At the dead end, it's a one-way street to the right. Take me around the block. The last street is an absolute dead end. You can't turn, right? Drive me around the block. So I stood behind him, and I said, so let's go down the end of the block. So we walked to the end of the block. And I said, now it's a dead end. You can only turn right. So we turned right. I said, okay, drive me to the end of this block. So we did that. We went around the block. Got to the end of the block, said, this is the very last street, and we can't turn at all. It's a total dead end. I said, that's square through. She said, what are you talking about? I said, that's it. That's the whole call. It's all to the right, all the way around. She said, that's it? I said, that's it. So we went back, we started over, had him drive me around. I said, now you got to start with the right hand, but all the turns are to the right. He had square through. Then we put him on the other side, so it was a left-hand turns, so we did a left-hand block. Then we did a 3/4 block. He was set because he understood that. So we looked for ways, and all of you have little things like that and you need to make sure you share them with your fellow callers.
And you will notice, first off, the amount of time that John used to go through 2 different examples was all of 5 minutes. He made a judgment value on just, they're of an age, they might realize what a jitterbug is. We're not talking brain surgery here to find out information about your dancers to make a judgment upon their learning style to find the best way to relate to. So you can effectively do it very quickly without dedicating tons of time away from the whole total teach. The second thing is that even though John communicated every single part of his 2 ideas here verbally, he painted graphic pictures that were within our experience that we have seen and felt and participated in. Yes, primarily the stimuli he was using was auditory, but he appealed to every other learning style by the approach that he used. So we have different strategies we approach on a particular action. We pick up more because the first one may not work. Continuing to repeat it is just yelling English louder to someone that doesn't speak English. Going to a different strategy is the best way to approach it. Since there tends to be X amount of learning styles, we need X amount of solutions. One doesn't work, you go to the next one. You don't care why it works. All we care about is whether it works.
Exactly. Could we have a square? Take a look at a few things. Might be kind of fun to do. We'll be using material that is everything within the mainstream program. Anything that we talk about, wouldn't matter because it applies right on through any program. We promise absolutely not to embarrass you in any way, shape, or form. It's not the intent. Wouldn't do that with a class member either. Okay, one of the things that we kind of talk about has to do with the tactile aspects and feel of calls. And one of the things that we all know how to do well and love and so on is our ever-popular square through, and we know how to have the heads do a square through. And let's do that. Heads, would you square through for me? That was nice. There was no courtesy turn in there. Did you notice? Okay. Now, square... Oh, I'm sorry. All right. Now, square through from the position we just did it feels completely different than square through from here. It's a little tighter. You don't have to move into the center to do it, as the heads had to move in a moment ago. They were to the outside. They had to take steps forward to activate it. So it feels different. We don't think anything of it as callers. It's a square through, is a square through, is a square through by any other name, but it is different to the dancer, particularly to the new dancer. It feels different. It could feel almost like a completely different call because it's starting somewhere different. Is oriented differently, and all of a sudden I'm not taking steps to start the call. I'm starting it hand and step at exactly the same time, right close, square through. Thank you. California twirl, please. The point here is that from where we activate a call makes a huge difference. Now, I'm going to give another example of this, and then I think Mike's going to have a comment to make about it. Let's do the ever-popular right and left through, and watch the courtesy turn. We pull by, and there is the left courtesy turn action. It felt fine, no problem. Watch the boy's action. Let's go again. We do the right pull by. The boy makes his slight turn in, left hand out, courtesy turns the girl. Ladies chain. Boys shift over, make the courtesy turn. To new dancers, that's 2 different calls, not the chain part. The courtesy turn is 2 different calls because it feels completely different. Even If we are really competent teachers and aware, and we say, on a lady's chain, gentlemen, you must shift to your right to be able to offer the lady the left hand directly as she comes to you to be able to then adjust your body and make the courtesy turn. That motion is different completely for you than is the motion of the courtesy turn after the pull-by on a right and left through. It is completely different. It feels different. It is almost disorienting. And the dancer has every right to say, well, why is this a courtesy turn when that other one's a courtesy turn? Because they both are. Now, I'm going to visit that right and left through courtesy turn again, and I very much want you to watch what the boys physically do as they make that slight turn in to accommodate the ladies, which is perfectly appropriate and natural. And then we're going to come back and visit where that shows up again in just a moment. Do your right and left through. Please observe the boys. And make that little adjustment in. Okay, good. Mike, did you have any comments on that to this point?
Well, what you might want to notice is that, first off, as John delineated the problem, it feels different. It's got the same name. It doesn't really make a lot of sense. And so we look at a logical order of, oh, we'll do building blocks. Well, that's wonderful, but building blocks is only a process of some learning styles. Other people do not see any connection whatsoever. If you're primarily auditory oriented, then you're working off the sounds that you're hearing. And courtesy turn sounds the same as far as you're concerned, but I'm over here, I do this different, I'm over here, I do something completely different. It doesn't make any sense to the learning process. So it becomes an illogical situation. Now, let's face it, people have adapted. And people do successfully learn these things. But think about the process that they're going through when they're initially introduced to it. Everything we have in square dancing has problems built into it, other than circle left and circle right. And even that has a teamwork aspect. So we all got to go the same direction for it to work. So if most everything has a small problem in it, a small hitch, then the people that are learning it the first time are going to encounter that small problem, that hitch. When do the problems build up to the point where it no longer becomes worthwhile to pursue the activity? Unless we know how to pursue those problems and solve them for the people, then we're going to have unsuccessful learners. And unsuccessful learners are an infection. They're unsuccessful for one tip. They don't learn a particular call. They go, so the people inside the tip, the other three couples, first off had an unfortunate experience. They leave their square for the next tip. They do not know the call that's been taught. And so you go on to the next call, teach, and the next tip. Meantime, they got a problem with the call that occurred before. They break down the new square they're in. Plus the three people who may have had learning problems now because of this couple have gone on to new squares to cause more problems. No matter what size your group, by the end of the dance, they're all infected. So allowing an infection to go on just simply because, well, I haven't got time to finish teaching this right to this one couple, creates your own problems in the course of your lessons.
Okay, let's do something. Everybody pass through for me here and do a California twirl. Now, I had asked you to remember the boy's action in the courtesy turn as he made his little turn in. Has anybody ever seen new dancers do a courtesy turn on the second part of square through? Watch the boy's action. Square through 4. Watch what this boy does. Look at the turn. It's exact. Go ahead, do your square through. But the turn action that he's doing is identical. He's making that same turning motion in toward the girl to start his second hand of the square through, and the new dancer is going to insert that courtesy turn many times because it is muscle memory, it's a tactile feel. He's done a courtesy turn from that feeling repeatedly because we've given him ladies chain over and over again, we've given him right and left through over and over again, and after all, square through starts with a right pull by, right and left through starts with a right pull by. They both start with that turning in action for the boy. We've invited the courtesy turn, right? We don't mean to. We don't even think of it that way, right? But that's the feel. We have set them up to invite that call, right? To invite them to go into an extra call. Now, can they get away with it? Luckily, because of the actual action of square through, they can sometimes quite often pull it off and still be safe. But, you know, we find ourselves saying what happens, and of course it messes up the timing of the call. But that's why that happens. When we can perceive those kinds of problem spots, we then know where to head them off. Do a trade by. I'd like you to see it again. Slide through. Now, This time, do the right and left through. Do your right pull by. Watch the way he turns in for his courtesy turn. All right. Pass through. Partner trade. Now do your square through. Make it 3 this time. But watch as he turns in that same exact body action and square through 3, and you come by. This invites that kind of a problem for us. Well, the more problems, the more breakdowns, or the more we find ourselves, it causes us to hitch as a caller, doesn't it? And we start to say, okay, you're right. Right? Well, it breaks the flow. They realize something's wrong. They may not realize what's wrong, but it breaks that flow. Every time we break that sense of flow or movement or give a subconscious sense to the dancer that something wrong has happened, we impede that learning process. So we would like to avoid as many of those pitfalls as we can. In other words, we would like to guarantee them a little bit greater sense of success. We would like to reassure or reaffirm the success that really is in fact happening. So by our eliminating those pitfalls, we have a better chance of success.
I give you chocolate mousse, I give you chocolate pudding. Hey, it's dessert. As far as the dancers are viewing it's dessert, there isn't a way of telling the difference at the time. Maybe if I have them side by side, I can tell there's a little bit more delicate nature to the mousse than to the pudding, but it kind of tastes the same. We're talking about such fine degrees of difference, but we're the experts. We can tell the difference right away. They're the consumers. It doesn't necessarily show up right away, and they have a problem suddenly because of the feel of the situation. If you don't appreciate that that's their problem, then you make the judgment that they are something bad as opposed to something that has not been taught correctly.
California twirl, please. Pass through. We're going to move on into something else. Wheel and deal, please. Could we have, I'm going to leap a little bit. Could I have a spread with the center slide apart and let the outside step between them? Thank you. Pass through. Wheel and deal. Zoom. Boys pass through. Now, one of the things that becomes very, very critical, and I find myself reteaching this everywhere I travel, particularly to new dancers, but sometimes not so new dancers, is we don't teach, or we teach and forget to stress the hand-touching aspect. Touch hands, always touch hands, please touch hands. It's so helpful if you're touching hands. You will increase your dancer's success rate by 50% within a 10-minute period if you can get dancers to begin to touch hands when they have not been touching hands. And I see it everywhere, particularly in the spring, early summer months, new graduates, because they become disoriented. Hand touches, touch points are so important to dancers. Even if they are disoriented, they've got a handhold, they've got somebody to help them. We need that as dancers, especially for our new dancers. In our educational process, it gives us a frame of reference. Now, there are positions we can put you in. The dancers tend not to take hands, and they get lost. Right? There's a number of examples we're going to show you that will help you in calls all along the line if we can get the dancers to touch hands. But if we don't remind them and make it habit, it won't happen. Success rate over and over again is what I'm looking for here, for the dancer to have a sense of competence. Nobody likes to be made to feel incompetent. If we give them little built-in things, it will guarantee them a level of success in spite of themselves, the better off we'll be. One of those things will be body flow and momentum, and we're going to talk about that momentarily. If you would, fellas, you're looking at the girls right now, star through, chain down the line. Because the ladies were touching hands after that star through, had they not been, there would have been groping, scrambling, looking around, trying to find a hand touch, right? That hand touch is important. It's part of tactile. It's also part of sense of awareness in the square. I find ourselves not seeing enough of that. Let's pass the ocean. All 8 circulate. That's actually a little later in the program. That's okay. Recycle.
But remember this.
Yes, remember this. We'll be back to that. Slide through. Okay. Box and that. Don't let go. Don't let go. Thank you. Okay. One of my pet peeves is I always hear time and time again is, the callers, I go to areas and say, well, we didn't have to do fan the top. Our caller taught it but said not to worry about it because nobody ever uses it. I hear it all the time. It's my contention that every caller uses it at every single dance. He just refuses to accept the fact that he does. Because fan the top is nothing more than what? Spin the top is a fan. It's a swing half and fan the top. That's all spin the top is. Swing half and everybody fan. So I contend that we use it all the time. In the difference is what? We put a swing half in front of it. Well, when we do boxing that in front of a fan in the top, it makes it much more successful. Why is it more successful? We have a hand touch situation that took place first. The right hand is occupied. There's only one hand left available, yes, in our box of 4. So we are pretty much guaranteed, and you've all heard this before many, many times, but let's talk about why is it successful. That's why I bring it up. The why of it is, here we have a reference point. We're facing somebody, right? And the part that's going to get interesting if I was teaching this to a new dancer is not so much the fanning part. We know we have the hand guarantee now. We've established that because we've tied up one hand, right? But how do we explain the ever-popular, and the girls move up? What does that mean? And the girls move up? I mean, that's really kind of a strange phrase, I find, you know. Move up where? You know, up the ladder to success, through the glass ceiling. I mean, I don't know, you know, but we use it all the time, and they kind of get a sense of what we mean. So we need to look for ways to say that. Now, I'm going to give you one that I've used it fairly successfully. Fellas, you're going to step forward with that free available hand, in this case it's the fellas, and you're going to cast off 3/4. We're going to get into Castoffs as our next item. Girls, don't move. Right? Now, many of us will say, well, girls, you're going to move up to meet the boys. And you can do that, but another way that some of the callers like to say it is to say you're going to step all the way across, you're going to turn to face him and step up and give him your hand, and that works, but don't do it. That's kind of geometric, I think. You know, they'll say extend or circulate across the square and make a 90-degree turn and extend. And not everybody likes engineering terms real well, but if you'd like a descriptive term, a visual term, like Mike and I have been talking about finding visual ways, you could think about it in this, I'm working toward my group, and it's like I'm getting on an on-ramp in the car. I'm back to the cars again. Mike does food, I do cars, right? Right? But you're going to blend on in the on-ramp as if you're getting on in a little curve, just that little arcing curve in the on-ramp to hook on to the end. So go ahead, girls, hook right up onto the end. All right? Okay? And that brings you up. It's just another way to express it. It's a mental picture, a mental map, if you will. And we look for ways like that to reach people if you don't want to use the geometry, if you will, or the engineering terms.
John's explanation here exists nowhere on the CALLERLAB official definitions.
Well, we can fix it.
Yet, this is one of the best ways of justifying our own existence as teachers. Anyone can buy a textbook and read it. To be taught by an instructor is the whole ball game of teaching, because we interpret the information for them so that it is accessible to no matter what learning style you are. And so what John did here was interpret the information. He didn't bankrupt these people forever dancing the rest of these things or make it hard for them to understand. He found a way of translating it to the point where they could get to the spot in some method that they understood. And that's successful teaching. He gets the point across. The other thing is that there are different traits of fan the top. You notice that on a fan the top, the dancer you're adjacent to at the start is who you're adjacent to at the conclusion.
Thank you.
Which means you can look for each other. It's another way of recognizing how to do it. From here, everyone fan the top. So the boys 3/4, the girls move up. Look for the same person. Fan the top. Yes, we're going 3/4 again, guys, I realize that. But the thing is, it's still the same person that you're meeting again. Once I've given you that recognition trait, even if you don't really know how to do the call, I can find the person that was beside me. And so it's one more check-off, one more method of understanding how to do the call, one more way of making the dancer feel confident about the call as opposed to dreading its existence.
I'm smiling, Mike's stealing my thunder because the same person situation was coming up next, but it's okay, because I tie it into a thing. There's a teaching system or methodology referred to as chunking, and is when you take like things that are not at cross purposes, that build one upon the other, that are very, very logical, but not building to such an extent that you overwhelm people. And you can chunk things together. And I actually already gave this one to you, and I told you. Now, if we know that fan the top is the center's cast 3, and the ends move up, arc up, isolate up, ramp up, however you want to say it, however you've chosen to teach it, right? Fine. Now, we'll also now address the fact that whoever you start with is who you're going to finish with. I'm going to give you the next call in the package. You know fan the top. Ergo, and I also know, I'm going to assume at this point, is somewhere along the line I have taught you trade, or I have taught you swing half, whatever. All right? If I've done that, I can now give you spin the top at the same time, and we have the calls 2 done for the price of 1, if you will. On the call spin the top, everybody swing half, fan the top, centers go 3, the ends are moving along. Who do we meet? Same person we just had, right? What do we got? 2 for the price of 1. Because we know the centers cast 3, the ends move up. All I did was put a swing half in front. How do I help the dancer? I will help them with the cue. I will say, spin the top half by the right and fan it. All of a sudden, I'm using a whole call as part of the cue. But the dancer is more successful, and they're hearing that term fan the top, and it is no longer a mystery call.
Now, there are 2 things. John used a logic of approach that went from the small part of the problem to a bigger problem by building the block up. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that is the way to approach everything. Sometimes it is easier to tear down from a bigger thing to a smaller part than it is to build up. I have historically, in our development of square dancing, the bigger item usually occurred first. Partner trade did not come first. Trade by came before that, and actually barge through came before that. So those parts of trade by and partner trade were taken out of the bigger call, not the smaller call. California twirl came from dive through, not the other way around. In square dancing, we have tended to have the bigger object first, and the little parts came out of it. So historically, the development was that way, and maybe there was a good reason why it developed that way, and that can be the basis for your teaching approach. Is the bigger can be the thing, and then taking the small parts out of it. We already know all of the parts that exist. Sometimes the bigger pattern is what really sets into the dancer mind, and taking the little parts out of it makes it more effective. Also, I want to show you something really interesting John did. Recycle, everybody. Good, so we got lines of 4, all kinds of good stuff. Everybody pass through, bend the line, stand right where you are, don't you dare move, okay? Now, reach out without moving your feet and touch the person in front of you, if you can get that far, okay? Now, see how far apart they are? Good. Now, everybody box the net. And they're not as far apart here for John's fan the top. So what he's done was set them up for a successful approach to solving the fan the top problem, because they're not really starting from lines of 4 facing. They've actually been pulled just a little closer together so that the guys can conveniently touch the left hand to do the cast 3/4. They're in a position where they can be far more successful in their first approach to the teach than just simply teaching it from lines of 4 facing. And John set that up so well so the dancer success rate has increased dramatically over where you might have taught it the first time.
And again, that was the hand-touching situation. Okay, everyone pass through. Let Mike interject something right here, please.
Everybody do U-turn back. One interesting thing, even though we're communicating so much auditorially here, it doesn't mean that that is the primary learning style we're appealing to. There are all kinds of ways of showing both visual and tactile type approaches, but communicating it auditorially. Melton Luttrell, in a conversation with me a number of years ago, had this wonderful idea on how you let dancers start solving problems themselves with unfamiliar calls. He said that when he teaches dancers, he tells them that if they are reaching out for a handshake on the call, then the call is going to be a pull-by. And that any other action of reaching for a forearm or reaching for a hands up, depending upon what part of the country you're from, there's going to be a turning action. No pull-by actions start with palms up. No pull-by actions start with forearm grips. And a way to start successfully solving problems for themselves. If you tell them to reach out and shake hands, they're going to pull by. And they can trust that occurring. And when I took a look at all the programs we have at CALLERLAB, that's true of calls all the way up through challenge. If you start with a handshake, you're going to be pulling by. If you start with any kind of arm grip, whether it's hands up or forearm grips, you're going to be turning the dancer in front of you and not pulling them by. And so suddenly you give them a basis to feel their way through a call so they have some kind of tactile touch to what's going on there. And you've also given them visual cues. That everybody sees the handshaking when you talk about handshakes, turning actions, and so forth. We connect it with people who don't necessarily speak the square dance jargon right away. It's wonderful when we have advanced dancers. They're indoctrinated like we are. So, but beginner dancers, people that have come in off the street, the people we're hoping to attract to this activity, don't speak square dancing yet, and the only way we're going to make them speak it and understand it is by finding ways to communicate to them in the language they do speak.
Okay, let's have everybody star through. Centers, California twirl. Centers, if you would. Everybody double pass through. We'll do it this way. Okay. Centers in, and of course, what am I going to call? Cast off 3/4. Of course, don't do it. Don't do it yet. Not just yet. Not just yet. Overtrained, obviously. Castoffs, whether it be a quarter, half, 3/4, I feel are one of the most underused items that we have, but they are a very good call in terms of teaching dancers orientation in the square, and they will also be an item that points out a whole bunch of the different aspects that Mike has introduced to you in learning theory. Now, one of the things that has to happen in these actions are the hand touches, in terms of reference that we talked about before, security, frame of reference, centers, ends. We'll also talk about painting a picture for you in terms of frame of reference. On a cast-off, we count walls in many cases, because how far is 3/4, and then you always have the engineer in the group who starts going, let's see, how many degrees is that? And of course, I'm not an engineer, and therefore I can't tell you. I don't know how. Oh, thank you. It's 270 degrees, as opposed to 90, as opposed to 180, and so on, and 360 degrees being all the way around. Well, a lot of folks don't relate to that real well, and I guess my question, it's a shame Tim Crawford's in here. I was going to ask Tim if they do degrees in metric in Canada, but maybe they don't. I don't.
No, but it costs them 30% more to do it.
Oh, well, that's okay then. Okay. So the deal is that, we put the dancers here and we start talking to them about how to do this. Well, one of the things that I like to talk to about the dancers, and I think most of us have heard the old reference. I know I learned it 32 years ago, where the centers are pushing the post of the gate, right? And the ends are the post, and the others walk around the post, and they push it all the way around until the gate is closed and you're looking back in. That was one picture that was painted, but it worked. It was certainly a picture that could work for you. One of the ones that I use, and quite often, let me do this. This is something that I'm going to ask you to bear with me for just a moment. Everyone, if you would, wheel and deal and spread. And I'll ask, we can do that. Everyone, if you would, pass through, tag the line, and face the opposite of in. Well, I knew you were getting bored, and I was a little worried about you guys have been standing up a long time. Okay. Now, I will often put dancers in a teach situation, depending on the call. We know that we don't, at mainstream per CALLERLAB, we don't have girls courtesy turning boys, for example, but I will often put the dancers in a gender arrangement in the square that I can talk gender to the dancers. This is a quick relationship situation. They know exactly who I'm talking to, and that helps. And I'll make jokes of it. I'll kid. I'll say, okay, well, obviously, we're going to put the ladies in the position that is the most difficult, because I guarantee myself a greater sense of success. So in the call, and people will groan and carry on. Or I'll say that I'll put them there because this is the position that is the dominant position that requires the most control in the call, and therefore that's why the women are in that position. So I'll do that sort of thing. But you get the dancer's attention, but you also keep it light, and you keep it kind of fun. Or you'll say, all the pressure is on you, ladies, just like at home. You're the ones that are responsible for all the important things. Now, in the call cast off 3/4, I will say to you that when you're in lines or waves, the center dancers are always in charge of this call, and you are always going to be the pusher. You are going to push the end dancers to move around all the way until you have become centers again, facing back in on a 3/4 cast. Now, this is one approach, and many of us do it this way. We go all the way, the full 3/4 to begin with. Other times I will teach this in the small segment. I will teach the quarter, the half, and then the 3/4 to bring the dancer around. And I will do it from many different places, not just from the lines. So the dancer understands that in all of the cast-offs, the center, from lines and waves, the centers are in charge. So let us try the idea of the cast-off 1/4. So girls, you're pushing a quarter. Push the boy, girls. Be aggressive. Pretend you're at home. There you go. All right. That was 1. Now, girls, you're still going to push the boy 1 more quarter, so you'll be looking in when it's over. Go ahead, good. Push 1 more. So that's half. That's 2/4, right? Now, girls, you're still pushing this same guy around, pushing 1 more quarter, so you're now looking in. There's the 3/4. Everyone pass through. Girls, you're still in charge. Cast off 3. Push. 1, 2, 3. All right. Did you want to say something? You had your hand up.
Yes. And first off, I use identically the same kind of procedure John's using here about push and so forth. And yet, as I was sitting here thinking, I have seen in the last number of times teaching that obviously push has different meanings to different people. I watched everybody pass through. I watched the lady here in the purple, Violet.
Nancy. Her name's Nancy. It's not Violet.
And not to pick on you, look around quizzically when she was asked to push.
Mm-hmm.
And you push didn't really necessarily have a meaning for you.
It did when I said like at home. When I said like at home, she knew what I meant.
Well, she gave him an elbow shot is what she gave him.
Okay.
But, I mean, and what I think we see here sometimes is that we assume that we say push. Push kind of sometimes has different meanings.
Mm-hmm.
We can push somebody laterally away from us as well as around something, and we may not necessarily be getting across sometimes. We sometimes think that some verbs communicate themselves very well, and in reality, we really still haven't gotten across yet. It was interesting when you talked about the example of the gate and being one of the old examples of teaching cast-off, yet I wonder now when we look around in today's environment how often we really have gates that swing about. We have gates that slide apart now. And so when we talk about gates, maybe the picture we're putting in her mind is a one that slides out.
Yeah.
And so maybe better we should talk about the revolving door. That the end is the center of a revolving door, and she's pushing the revolving door around. And maybe we got a more graphic picture there of a pushing action that goes forward as opposed to literally pushing that gentleman beside her the other way.
Or directing him or what have you. And we look for these kinds of things, and that's the whole point. How do we communicate these things? And I think that's certainly valid. Now, I think we want to go on and show you other ways we apply the same idea. But Mike's absolutely right. I think it's a good point because it could be a lateral movement. I agree.
And what was interesting, and not to pick on you, but no, you did such a great job because you showed us a different approach to trying to solve a problem. You were looking around the square trying to find the spot to go to. This is a visual learner. She's not a tactile learner. She's not counting walls. Walls did not occur to her as trying to survive what was going on.
Right. What do they want? That's what she wanted to know. What does he want? How do I give him what he wants? And that's what many of our dancers do. Okay, let's do this. Tag the line. What do you mean, what? Okay. Girls.
May I ask the lady one question real quick?
Sure. It's Nancy.
You would have really liked for me to have told you where you were going to go. Right, but you would have liked me to have told you where you were going to go, and you would have gone there, right? Visual learner.
Yeah.
You can tell how people learn by observation. All you got to do is be aware.
Now, and let's make a point here. Had I kept same-sex together as partners on that action to begin with, I could have said, cast off 3/4, boys to the right, girls to the left. Would have been another way to have approached it. And that would have been for a different learning style for different people. So you can come back to that. It's another approach. Girls, you're beside yourselves, so to speak. Would you trade? Whatever. Star through. Girls, you're still beside yourselves. I know you're touching hands. Thank you. Trade. I still have the ladies in charge as far as I'm concerned. And if I want to have a cast off through the revolving door, you like that, Mike? There you go. All right. You're going to be in charge. You're going to direct away from the center because on cast off 3/4 from lines and waves, the centers walk away from the center. So where's the center of your line? You're going to walk away from that center. You're going to turn your back away from the center. All right? You're going to direct the end dancer in the direction that you choose to go. Cast off 3/4. That can be a very comfortable dancing action and quite effective. Last night it was used in a singing call figure at the dance's cast off half and all promenade. Not often used, but certainly an effective dancing situation. And it can get even better, worse, depending, because we're only talking about the parallel lines. We haven't even talked about titles, and I'm not sure we're going to take the time. We don't really have the time to share with titles on that same type of approach, or 3-in-1 lines and all these different aspects of it. But go ahead, Mike. You're churning.
It is interesting and fascinating to see what happened when he started to teach. Past the ocean. I'm trying to get back to that spot. Recycle, veer left. Girls turn and face each other. Boys face in. You're looking at the girls' back. Good. And I think we were here, right? Double pass through. All the girls do a U-turn back. Star through. And he wanted to tell you about that you were centers. So your phrasing was girls touch.
Girls, I know you're still touching hands.
Right. And then the next thing you said was girls, you're centers. And the girls looked into the center towards each other. Yet what he was about to teach, the action was away from there.
Right.
He attracted the girls' attention to the hand over the center part of the middle. And probably all of us would have done this or have done this, and then we wonder why they might have a problem succeeding in doing the cast-off. We distracted them because we may have helped too much, or our thinking process says, okay, we got to let the girls know they're centers so they can work away from there. Maybe what we want to do, and maybe even more comical, is to say, okay, girls, you're centers, don't look, or look away from there, turn your back on, and now you've got them attracted away from center for the cast.
Right.
Yeah.
Michael's right. Normally in the teach process, what I would have done is to have had the girls trade to set up the body flow action to do what I referred to earlier as the push cast, because that gives them the motion to help incorporate the dance action. So I would have had them touching hands for the trade that I was looking for. Had they not touched hands, that would have been awkward and they would have been groping for it, but that would have been the norm. I chose not to do it because we were, again, working on the cast.
And his trade leads him to positive flow to do the call correctly, and yet his attention has been directed now towards the center of the square.
That's right.
So, sometimes one solution causes a different problem.
Yep. And that's actually right. We can do that. We're worrying about one thing that we want to have accomplished. We go on to where we were heading, and what happens? We were successful in spite of. Why? Because we all know we're focusing on cast off 3/4. But newer dancers don't always know that. So we can, of course, set ourselves up to fail. It certainly can happen that fashion. I'm going to touch on one more thing, Mike. If you want to do anything else, then we can certainly take questions. The one thing I'm going to ask, I don't need the square longer. Do you, Mike?
No.
Okay. Let's thank the square very much for all their time up. We do very much appreciate it. Okay. We do know we have some questions, and Peggy Lee, you're on the top of the list for questions. Let me just touch on a couple of things quickly. One of the things that, in my view, reinforces a good learning environment is the feeling that the dancers have, as soon as possible, that they are, in fact, dancing, that they are, in fact, being successful. And there's a couple of things that bring that to light. I use a different type of music, as most of you do, I trust, when you're actually in the teach mode than when they're in the dance mode. I believe a lot in repetition. As Mike knows, I teach a call one week, the next week I teach it again, the following week I review it, then starting in the third week I use the cue, and I use the call every single dance from that point forward religiously. I keep a check sheet, I mark it off, no matter what the program is, they hear it every single dance without fail, repeatedly. Right? I keep track of it. I don't assume they're going to know it and skip it one night. Don't do that. The other thing is the momentum and the music that we use. When it's dance time, when it's practice time, right, there's music used to let them dance, right? I make them dance the tempo of the music. I don't slow it down for them. They need to dance in time to the music. I don't race the dancer, but they feel like they're dancers. If I have to give them positions, formations that are not as challenging, for want of a better word, that's fine. I'm not worried about that. I'm worried about them feeling that they are dancers and they are achieving. and that will happen. I give them bright music. I give them smooth music. I don't scare them. Sometimes when they're feeling really good, and I'm going to go with the things they know the best, I'll give them a hot piece of music, especially quite often to finish up the night. And another thing that we do, you need to tell them how well they're doing. Not just let them experience it. You're their instructor. They need to hear it from you. Much as our kids need to be told how well they're doing and it's reinforced, they actually need to hear it. They need the affirmation. We do that with students. We need to tell them. Another place for success, incorporate the calls into the singers. Please do not let the singing call that you want to use direct what you're going to teach tonight. No matter how new and how much you want to do it, unless you can change the figure to what they know, the one does not dictate the other. So flow of calls, one leading into the other, will help guarantee their success, because even if they are slightly disoriented or unsure, their body motion will carry them. They'll recover. One of the things that I look for in dancers at any program that I'm teaching, when they begin to recover, I know they're learning. I tell them repeatedly, the recoveries are what counts, because that tells me they're learning. So we tell them, we give them the music, we allow them to dance. Those are all reinforcing ideas over and above these things that we've talked about in ways of trying to guarantee them missing the pitfalls. Those are the things that I have for now. Mike?
It's important for us to grade the dancers, is what John's just saying here. Like any other learning situation, the reason the teacher gives out grades is so that some other independent source values what they did. More often than not, we tend to be the hardest on ourselves about things, and particularly the dancers, since they don't know how to prioritize, will take some idiosyncrasy we've shown about the call and make that the major aspect of it. Unless we as callers prioritize, unless we as callers grade and help them to understand how they've succeeded, how satisfied we are with their development, then they'll grade themselves, and they're much harder on themselves than we would ever be. The other interesting thing that John talked about was the application of the environment in the whole learning process. It's not just all the music and everything else you did, but the lighting in the room, how the hall feels, temperature, all these things are factors. I want to relate two stories to you, but first off, let me explain something about the whole learning style ideas. This is recent development of theory here. You're not going to go to your library and find textbooks on it. You will be able to go to your bookstores and find books on it. You will be able to find magazines and articles on it, because that tends to be where the development of all that ideas and so forth is going on. So those are the places where you can pick up some things about that. It's still a skill that is in a developmental stage. It's still a science that's being developed. One of the two things that occurred to me in the process of getting involved in all this was I first learned about learning styles and environments, effects on it, and so forth from a dancer that was an educator in one of my groups when I was still in Louisville, Kentucky. She had become to do a teacher's workshop with her, which was all the teachers of a particular grade level in the Louisville area. Normally what she'd do is that she would go and try to present these exercises to the teachers, and the teachers would have to pretend to be students. And so it never ever really quite worked, because they really didn't know the answer to the thing. Well, what I did with her was come in and teach them how to square dance. And we did kind of a one-night stand with them and so forth. Then we sat them all down. We gave them the handouts for all of them to read the definition of grand square, and wanted to find out if any of them thought they could do it by just simply reading that definition. Yes, that's exactly what they did to all their students all the time. Give them handouts and expect them to attain a skill by simply reading the handout. And they discovered that really wasn't teaching. 8 of them did get up and try to do grand square, holding the papers in front of them. Let me tell you about the disaster that occurred in front of everyone. So then we got everybody up, and I taught grand square, and then I left an ambush in it. I put on a piece of music there was no way in the world to dance grand square to in your life. It had to be a piece that was the caller that taught me to call Boots Are Made for Walking, which was a 56-count figure. Didn't lend itself to grand square at all, and the bodies are still everywhere, even though I gave them a successful teach. Then I changed the environment by putting a marching-type song on, and suddenly they saw the difference that just environment can make in being able to learn. So all these factors occur into learning. Your music is just as important as anything else as far as the teach goes. Giving people something to slow waltz to try to learn how to do grand square with is just not going to really be effective working. In summary, the story that one of the learning consultants I've worked with has talked about is the development of this learning style idea. Two independent people were coming up with this idea. One was a linguist, and the other was a psychologist. When they found themselves working on the same subject, they started to work together. And they would do interviews with people, and they would ask people questions and see how they responded and answers and so forth. Well, so they had an interviewee in, and they were asking the questions, and every time this guy answered a question, he looked up. And the linguist said, "Why are you doing this?" And he says, "Oh, I'm just looking for the answer." And the psychologist says, "Well, of course, that's right." And the linguist goes, "You guys crazy?" Linguist was of a different learning style than the other two people in the room. And the interesting thing was that when the interviewee said, "Well, I'm looking for the answer," he said, "Doesn't everybody?" The question is, doesn't everybody learn the same way? The answer is no. And the only way to effectively teach is to learn how people learn. And we'll take questions at this point.
Peggy. Thank you. From the microphone on the questions, please, because the session is being taped.
Not so much questions.
Comment?
You touched on it with the hand grips and whether there's a handshake grip or forearm
Mm-hmm.
to be a pull-by or a turn grip.
Mm-hmm.
I heard it. Well, when you were doing the Castoffs recorders, a lot of callers were doing old task centers in Castoffs recorders. Well, 15 years ago, when I was taught centers in, callers had people do this elbow locking grip, which I never liked. As a short person, the tall person would get me with my arm, it was very awful. I still find people doing this today. As soon as you say centers in, you can't record, they're trying to grab your elbow, and I don't know whether it's just that's the way they learn or what, but this is awful. They should never be taught to do that elbow locking thing.
Peggy identifies a problem that a segment of our dance community has. Peggy, please remain standing.
She's vertically challenged.
Yeah. And that's not picking on people that are short, because people that are big also are contributors to the problem. It is realizing that we're not all uniform shape out of cookie cutters. If you're short, it is hard to see the other side of the square. It's hard to see the formation you're in. We talk about formations as if the dancers have the overview that we have up here, and they don't. They have the side view, and the side view doesn't look anything like we say it's supposed to look like. So, giving dancers pictograms helps along the way, but it's also validating her feelings. I can't see this. Well, there's a good reason why, and there's some ways of giving you some strategies to figure it out. So I solve her problem. I validate her feelings. She no longer feels like an inadequate dancer. It's just simply she's a short dancer blocked out by bigger dancers. And bigger dancers need to also realize you're blocking someone's view. So if they need to see something someplace, somewhere along the line, help them. It's part of the cooperation that square dancing is based upon.
Let me also jump in here very quickly. I know we have a question coming. One thing that we did not dwell on a lot was demonstration calls. There are some calls that lend themselves better to be visual for the dancers. A good one, of course, at Plus is, I find, spin, chain, and exchange the gears is much easier to teach if someone has actually seen what that pattern looks like. And if you have the luxury of a whiteboard and are capable of using one, lots of times you can show the dancer, particularly circulate patterns, is quite often helpful to be seen on a whiteboard, because dancers cannot see the same pattern that we see as callers from above. That's another possibility, and we didn't touch on it. If we do end up with time, we could possibly get a square up for that.
One thing I do with dancers that may have problems seeing an overall formation is bring that particular person up on a stage if they're doing a sit-out. Why don't you come up here, or just sit on the side, stand with me or anything. Look and see what that looks like from up here. Is that suddenly the picture dawns on them when they can actually see it and see what it looks like, as opposed to always being in the middle of it. It's like recognizing where the outline of the forest is. If you're just surrounded by trees, it's hard to tell what it looks like.
And he's created more new callers that way.
I think to some degree it's too late at that moment. It's earlier in their training. It is what John pointed out so dramatically before. They're confusing the two issues. And somewhere along the line, we need to, A, recognize that as part of the process, B, try to find other ways of solving the problems. One of the things we need to do, like I talked about validating her feelings of being surrounded by trees, is validate the dancer's feeling out there of, yes, it feels alike. It's okay for it to feel alike, and let's work together to find some way to make it different in your mind, and we'll grade this solution just for you. And what happens is later on you find that it's a solution that applies a lot of different places. But somewhere along the line, we need to find a way to solve the problem. Yeah.
Do you find that primarily in the singing call as the problem? Okay. If you have the beat of music that you need, I would suggest sometimes there are trigger words that may help you. And it could be right and left through, then square through, or start a square through, or now, which is a shorter word even, now square through 4. That tends to give a trigger to them that this is something new that's occurring. And now is a nice short word, and if you can slip that in, it may help. Then you need to stress it. You need to emphasize the word. Now square through 4, da-da-da-da, all do-sa-do. Watch for your phrasing to your music, but that may help in that situation.
We've got a great language, but we don't have any punctuation for it. And John just gave an example of us providing the punctuation needed to understand it.
Yeah.
Have you noticed, say, when finally all those, when is courtesy turn taught then? When is courtesy turn taught?
We just moved it later on.
Oh, I understand. I understand you're still doing the job, but at some point in time, the dancers know both square through and courtesy turn. So the thing I think you might want to still observe is whether the problem still occurs with some individuals. That there's hardly ever a universal solution.
Yeah.
It more often than not will still occur because dancers' feelings will get into the process. And so whether we put one person, we certainly have taken a step towards differentiating into their minds and not always associating call actions together. But at the same time, if things feel alike, it doesn't matter what order we introduce them in, they still feel together. And so for some people that dance by feel, it's always going to be an issue for them. The only thing to watch for, as you can go, particularly now that we tend to have smaller size lesson groups, is that it is possible to have people totally in the lesson group of one learning style, which means that you may hit on the perfect solution for that group, and in your mind is, I've discovered the perfect solution. You got to keep remembering for that group belongs in that sentence, because the next time the next group of people will show up, and suddenly your solution won't work anymore. And it's really unfortunate. It's still, with the size, we're talking hundreds of people to be able to find different groups of people. And we don't see hundreds of people in our lesson groups any longer. So it's to realize that somewhere along the way, you're going to hit somebody which you may suddenly make the decision that this is a bad dancer. It's not a bad dancer. It's a dancer with a different type of learning problem, and we need to try a different solution.
And but if you've made yourself aware of more than one technique, then what are you? You're a much more competent teacher. You're much more versatile, and you're able to do that. And just keep it in mind. That's all Mike's saying. But you've obviously taken some steps yourself that have worked for you. That's great. Okay, a couple of aspects on it, and most of us have heard the storyline about the person who generally just cannot feel it, and where you have had them come up between tips or during a tip when they're not scheduled to dance, and you have them hold their hand against the side of the speaker, actually turn up the bass aspect so they can literally, physically feel it. I know there are actually deaf people who can dance to some degree, or virtually deaf, where they lay the speaker down on the floor, and the speaker will vibrate, and they can actually sense or feel the rhythms in that fashion. There are some dancers who hear perfectly fine, who have no sense of rhythm. If they ever took a step in time to the music, it would be purely by accident, and most of us as callers can't watch them because it makes us crazy. All right, I recognize those kinds of folks, and if I haven't been able to help them in one way or the other, sometimes it's simply a matter of drawing their attention to it. They're lazy. Sometimes they're just lazy. They just saunter around the square because they know where they're going. They're not worried. They're not in a hurry because they know where they need to be. But you indicate to them, this presents a problem for other dancers in the square. We need you where we need you when we need you there. It feels better. You'll be less tired. Whatever you talk to them about it, sometimes that will make a difference. And other times, it doesn't really matter. Try as they will, they can't. And I don't take them to task because, frankly, they're there to have a good time. It's still their recreation. I'm not going to ask them to leave, certainly. You do the best you can, as has been my experiences. I'd love them to have the opportunity to feel the music because I think there's so much a part of what we do. But aside from those solutions, I wouldn't know what else to do, Charlie.
I think, though, along the line, as John is talking about, is you need to talk to the people. First off, it's finding out what their expectations are out of dancing. If it is truly dancing, then certainly we have a problem. If it's because they're there to socialize, it's because of the intellectual puzzle, that's their forte and what they want out of it, then we simply need to make sure they don't interrupt anybody else along the way. They don't cause problems. But if they're meandering through the square and it's irrelevant to the music, doesn't bother anyone else and doesn't impede anybody else from being able to square dance, then we really have to accept that little pimple on the face of the square in front of us. And so somewhere along the way, you need to make a decision of how vital a problem is this. But the only way you're going to find out anything is by being able to talk to the person, find out what their background is. You know, do you listen to music on the radio, or have you ever danced before? Have you ever done this? If you don't find out any information on it, then you're making judgments simply by your observation as opposed to the realities of the things in front of you. I watched a dancer in front of me for years, always frowned every moment of his life out on the floor to the point where, can I just give you your money back and go watch TV at home? Later on, I found out that he had a cancer that caused part of his jaw muscles, and it was really unpleasant to smile. And boy, did I feel bad. And so I didn't find, and square dancing was his life. It was his recreation away from the cancer that he was facing. You know, and I felt about this tall. And so suddenly it wasn't me trying to please him. He was realizing that his presence at the dance was telling me how happy he was. Bill Nichols is probably the best clogging instructor I've ever worked with in my life. And when I watch him do introduction to clogging with huge groups of people, the first 10 minutes he simply spends in walking. And the first part of it is walking without the music and to try to establish some kind of rhythm there. And he builds up from that point. You know, the question is how far along do you want to carry this?
I was curious, did anyone have any call conundrums in particular that they don't like to teach or they find themselves struggling with, or it's always a nemesis call to get taught that, you know, perhaps some of the callers in the room could share, some help with? You know, is there any call? Well, every time I teach that slide through or whatever, it's a problem call. Maybe between us as a group we could come up with some suggestions or help on those. No? Okay. Just a thought.
I want to get back to one thing that did occur. During the course of John calling out here, he called an all-eight circulate, and I'm not picking on you all the time, and one person in the square turned right instead of turning left. It was in the center on the all-eight circulate. Why? It's because most of the turning actions that we have asked her to do in square dancing have always been to her right, into her box. She has found if she turns that way 90% of the time, she will be correct. So we are suddenly trying to get her to go a different direction, and yet we've allowed her to build up a whole repertoire of going to the right. If we don't understand that the problem in there is not that she doesn't understand how to go to the left, but that everything she knows in square dancing goes the other way, we don't understand the problem we're going to have when we teach all-eight circulate.
We've invited that failure. You know, we have programmed the dancers to go the wrong way because we call everything to the right, you know, or the overwhelming majority. So we've programmed ourselves and the dancers to fail, and that's something that we have to take responsibility for.
And the right isn't necessarily the natural way of doing things, because, you know, we all drive cars. We pass people left shoulders all the time, and yet in square dancing we enforce the right shoulder pass. So, you know, if we're going against what natural inclinations everybody drives, it should be a left shoulder pass when we pass through.
That's right.
So it is how we have presented things. We've created our own set of problems.
Are there any other questions or comments or things to share? If not, one of the things that I'd like to leave you with is that we would like everyone, all the callers, you know, go back to your callers associations as well and try to heighten the awareness of thinking about the teaching techniques and how people learn, and share with one another ways that you think people are learning, and start watching to see how you believe the dancers that you're teaching are learning. Even if it's experienced dancers and you're teaching them a different way of doing a call or a quarterly call or whatever, and get a sense of it, or see if there's a different way to teach a call than you have been teaching it, because the more you think about how they're learning and how you're teaching or different ways to approach teaching it, the more competent you will be at the teaching process, and the longer we'll have dancers in the activity because they will become more competent more readily. They will learn easier. They will find it a more enjoyable process.
If you go away from your dance complaining about how bad the dancers were in front of you, they were never hatched. They were never created somewhere else or came across of a mass process. They were taught by someone. And this room is filled mostly with square dance callers. The someones are us, not them, it's us. We need to change how we teach if we want to have dancers in front of us enjoying what's up there. Thank you.
Thank you, folks. We enjoyed it.